Yes, Ronald Reagan appointed you to the IMF, where you were involved in managing the debt crisis in Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, among others. But I'm interested to know who was that HR manager who didn't think you were fit enough for the role in the first place, and later you basically the president appointed you there. Isn't that right?
Well,
There's something happened.
when you apply, I do remember applying for a job at the International Monetary Fund, and coming out of graduate school. And at the time, I only had my master's. And they said, but I had done all the coursework for a doctorate, but had not completed the dissertation. And I was told by the HR manager at the IMF that they would prefer to have a full doctorate in economics, and they would prefer it to be from a more traditional school, as they claimed, at Stanford, Harvard, University of Chicago. And I explained to them that the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy had a very strong international economics program, but they also forced you. It was required as part of the school's approach to international studies to engage in cross-disciplinary study, to study international politics, to study international diplomacy, to study diplomatic history, to study development economics as well as international economics. And frankly, when I got to the Treasury and eventually to the IMF, that served me very, very well, because I realized that issues of international economics, particularly in the world, can never be extracted from or separated from issues of international politics, geopolitical diplomacy, cultural issues, historical factors, and they came to play in virtually every debt crisis that I ever worked in. But, I came back and looked with a smile when I ended up being the U.S. director at the IMF instead of being part of their staff.
And did you meet the HR manager again there? Did you
I
happen
did,
to
I
run into
did,
him?
and he was a bit sheepish, but that's okay. I do remember him asking me whether or not I was going to try to get him fired, and I paused for a minute and said, no, I don't think that's necessary or appropriate. These things happen in life.
Yeah.
You run into hurdles and challenges along the way, and I was actually very fortunate that instead of starting my professional career as an international economist at the IMF, that I started it at the U.S. Treasury Department, which gave me early access to some brilliant policymakers. And I learned at the feet of some of the best in the world in those days. And so for those first years, I was a civil servant there before I had the honor of being appointed to the political positions by Presidents Reagan and Bush Sr. I learned as a civil servant at the feet of some of the best international policymakers that existed at the time in the U.S. Treasury.